Welcome to the new IT. Here we are, the new IT again. We're talking about the future. What is going on today, Brad? What's going on in this crazy IT world we're in?
Today's topic is ditch it or pitch it.
Ditch it or pitch it. That's right. Get rid of it or keep it or make a decision. Do something.
Absolutely.
Oh, but what are we talking about? Ditch or pitch what? Right. What are we saying?
So more specifically, we wanted to kind of tie into PHP development. So what we did is we brought in David Silva.
PHP development. That's like old school, isn't it? I mean, is that still around?
A little bit, but yeah, I mean, there are companies out there still using it.
I know. I'm just giving you crap. I'm giving our guest crap.
Absolutely.
I'm being attacked.
just a wee bit.
No.
I'm trying to defend you here. Come on.
Is it relevant still? We're going to talk about that today. We're going to find out if PHP is still relevant.
Right. So we brought in David Silva of Courtesy IT. So he's here to kind of help us and help us understand. Really, is PHP dead? So yeah,
or not. Or do you keep it? Do you throw it away? Is it still relevant? All of those cool things. Is that what we're going to talk about today, David?
Yeah, I suppose.
Awesome. Well, let's hit the ground running. Cool. Let's learn a little bit about David first. Can you give us a little bit of a background and kind of why we're talking to you about PHP and stuff like that first?
All right. Yeah. Well, I'm approaching 40 now, but I started programming when I was 13, and my aim was to write video games. I had grand plans for video games.
Oh, I think all of us tech folks at one time or another wanted to do some video games.
Maybe you two did. I didn't.
You're not a geek. We're true geeks. Come on.
I know. For you guys, yes, it makes sense. For me, no.
Right, but and I knew the most rational thing to do would be to write them in C, but I just had Visual Basic and QBasic. So I learned how to program with one of the slowest programming languages, and I learned the value of optimization,
and patience,
and and a lot of patience, and Basic is a horrible language too. So there's that, but. I got into IT shortly thereafter, ran around fixing computers for a long time, and then I was living in California at the time, and then, we had the financial event in 2008, and I was, of course, laid off, and like everyone else out there, and I was offered a job at an online math school because the owner knew a friend of mine, and was like, well, he's a smart guy, he can figure it out. So for whatever reason, they just believed in me.
That's the way it starts, yeah.
Right. And I came there writing HTML and doing, because I can do a little bit of graphic design, I would make the math images look better, spend a lot of time in Illustrator. And then they said, hey, our programmer just left. Do you want to learn PHP? And I was like, I guess. I mean, I've programmed before. I could probably get it. It's probably easier than C. But I was sent a book and then told, hey, figure this out and write some code for me,
Cool.
And so that's how I got started on PHP. And I also inherited a code base that was written in 2001 after it transitioned from Perl.
And this was 2009 or something?
Yeah, I was. Yeah, and this is probably one of the first online education companies in the world. They started in 1996 and came out of Cal Poly San Luis Obispo.
Wow!
Right. So I inherited this crazy math learning management system, and it was just all written very, very, very poorly by a lot of people. And so I got to sort of refactor it into something a lot nicer and using modern PHP. I mean, it was written in PHP 3 and it was 2009 and it had been shifted to 5.2, but just barely. And then we were at the edge of like not being able to run our server anymore because the PHP version was too old. So I immediately got thrown into like refactoring a language that I didn't understand completely well. And it was a total mess. So that's how I got started in PHP. And probably got to learn a lot of stuff the hard way, which stuck, and I kind of stuck with that language. But I got an old school procedural style written like a C program, and I experimented with a couple object-oriented ways of doing it, but realized they didn't work so well. So I actually kind of stuck with that old way of doing it. But then I didn't really realize the advantages of it until later, of doing it the old way. The old C way.
Got it.
So that led me on an interesting path in my career because I got stuck on sort of an older philosophy of software development.
Got it. That makes sense.
Well, let's find out.
Yeah, I mean,
what is this? What are we talking about?
For us non-technical people,
yeah,
help me understand. Like, what is PHP development, and why should somebody even get involved with PHP?
Well, that's a real good question because there's currently sort of a language war going on between PHP, JavaScript, and Python, and then Ruby kind of dropped out of the race. Or
Ruby came off the rails.
It came off the rails, yeah.
A little bit.
I'm not sure if it got back on the rails recently or not, but that's one that kind of dropped out as far as popularity, anyway. I think that PHP is actually a solid language. Especially with the release of version 8, it's a lot more like using C, and you can set it to be really strict with type checking and errors and whatnot, where you have all the strictness of C that can help you as a programmer, but also frustrate the heck out of you because you can set it so that it's ultra strict, so that the bugs are worked out of your code before you release it, and that's one of the things I like about it. And also that it's not JavaScript.
Fair enough.
Right. So why do you think somebody out there listening or whatever would be interested? Why is PHP still relevant for them? Why should they be looking at it?
Well, it was initially designed to do what a lot of websites still do today. It's basically the C language with a bunch of higher order functions for doing things like set a cookie, buffer the output, a lot of things you'd want to do in a back-end web application, sort of like Web 1.0 style. It's really good at that. On the other hand, there aren't a lot of languages that were developed with that in mind. So it was sort of purpose-built for doing web apps, whereas, say Python, I don't know what its origins are, but I know that it's really good at data processing and AI and things like that, and crunching stuff. But it wasn't really meant to be on the web, so that you sort of add that functionality on later with the framework. But with PHP, that framework's kind of built into it. And same thing with JavaScript, not intended to be ran on a server at all. So you kind of add those things on, but with PHP, it's already there. So you don't have to depend on as much other people's code. And I like that because the closer you can code to the machine, the better.
Right. Well, you said something a minute ago. You said it just again to JavaScript.
Mm-hmm.
So some people are saying PHP is going to go away, and JavaScript will be the king of the mountain, or what have you. What's your view on that? Is that true? What do you think?
JavaScript is really popular now, and Microsoft is behind it, creating things like TypeScript and all sorts of goodies for Visual Studio, and sort of supporting that language. So it could actually be that it wins out in the end, or another language could come in there and disrupt it, sort of like what Ruby tried to do. So really, it's just kind of like this. Who has the best technology? And here we are with these technologies. The most popular ones were written in the early 90s. And they weren't really well adapted to what we're doing on the web today. So even with PHP, you have frameworks like Laravel come out and do like even more, sort of high level stuff, and it does it really well. But then you also have the same things on JavaScript. So really, we're in a really weird place with web languages.
So do you think there'll be something brand new coming out, or do you think that's just inevitable, that this stuff is going to get cleaned house, or is it going to always go on and just keep mutating and changing into something different? And what do you think?
It's real hard to tell because I've always been on the lookout for a language that's better than PHP. Now I like it, and because I know it. Because I've invested 11 years in writing it, and the language, in my opinion, keeps getting better, and they are kind of fixing some of their past mistakes. But in JavaScript, they're kind of trying to do the same thing, releasing new editions. So I think the mutation is really likely. But if someone were to come out with something that
really innovative,
I think it would just clobber everything that's out there. And I have yet to see that language come out.
Have you even heard stories or anything, or it just seems like that's a unicorn out there waiting to happen?
I think that's a real unicorn. I wanted to believe in the Swift language by Apple because it is related to C, and therefore it's easy to pick up because a lot of languages were based on C for a super long time, and
right?
Still are. Even Rust is we might call it a derivative of C. But Swift, I thought, might kick butt and be really fast and a little higher level at the same time. It would be an easier entry point, versus learning something that's C-based. But the licensing and the support for anything that isn't Apple isn't as good as I'd like it to be. So I don't see anyone ever adopting it. Yeah, Apple wants to hold that. They want to say that they're open source, but really they're not handing
It's closed.
out.
Yeah. It's a closed market in that regard.
Yeah, so it's kind of unfortunate. Facebook, they had some PHP derivatives of their own, which improved performance greatly, but a lot of that stuff got reintegrated back into PHP. Like with PHP 8, we have, what is it? The just-in-time compilation where, you can get a really decent speed up on your existing code. Actually, PHP is one of the few languages that gets faster every release, but it gets more features. So I didn't know
that.
Yeah, so I really don't know. I don't keep up too much on what JavaScript's doing. I'm sure they're having similar, but I don't know of anyone that can just kind of break in and just throw everyone off. I would be the first adopter of something like that, where with PHP and JavaScript, you have all this language craft from decades ago.
Back,
it's like
back old stuff that they just leave in there.
Yeah, just legacy stuff where it's like, please don't use this, and they keep deprecating it. So it's like they might go in the direction of modernizing it by 9.
Cleaning house or some crap.
Yeah, it's
let's take a turn. I'm curious. So what would be the benefits of somebody maybe looking to get into the industry or changing things up? What would be the benefits of doing PHP or being a PHP developer? What do you think the benefits of that is?
Well, I'm going to tie into that a little bit too as well. What does a career path look like for somebody in PHP? Because it seems like, from what it sounds like, PHP is not going away anytime soon. So help me understand. Why should people get into it? And then correlated with what Bobby said.
Well, we have so many languages that are used on the web to drive the servers that your choice of language could be sort of specific to what part of the industry you want to be in. For example, if you're doing a lot of data crunching, then Python might be the best thing to learn if you're doing data science and stuff. So that would be the reason.
Okay.
With PHP, it's got the most heft. It's still probably running the majority of web services out there. So platforms like WordPress are built on PHP, and if you have that skill, then you can automatically use the most popular blog
So there's
system.
still a lot of jobs out there.
There are a lot of jobs. Whether they pay well is is up for debate, but it depends on what kind. With people are always needing stuff done with WordPress, and that's all PHP, and all relatively easy to get into. There's also Magento written in PHP, which is not easy at all to work with, but you can make a buttload of money as a developer for Magento if you understand that. So that's another avenue. And and any of the anything written before, say, maybe 2011 is most likely in PHP, and companies have these systems that they've maintained for a long time. So we'll call them legacy systems, but really they're
still running their whole dang company.
Yeah, and there's a lot of that, and so it's still relevant, but it's not hot. It's because it's just been around a long time, and there's something else that's hot. So it just kind of depends.
It's just that old workhorse that just keeps going.
Exactly. It's and who knows what the future of it is, but who knows what the future of any language is, because it's always crazy. It's always chaotic. True. So it's not. I don't think anything is a safe bet. You would want to go into PHP if you like the language. If it's something that works out for you and you like the philosophy which is built on, that would probably be why you would want to get into it, because it's almost a philosophical choice as to what language you go with.
Oh, that's That's an interesting road to go down.
Yeah.
But it's true. If you're not jazzed about what you're doing, I think anything in life, if you're not jazzed about what you're doing, it's not going to be a fulfilling career.
Agreed.
So I think if you're really into programming and you like the philosophy around PHP, that's probably, would you say that's one of your biggest motivators?
Yeah, the reason I personally like PHP is because I seem to get the most productivity out of it versus anything else, because it is oriented around what I am doing. So it seems like the best tool for me. And then I can also go write a command line utility in PHP if I wanted to. So I have that flexibility too. So it's like I can write Linux system stuff as well. So it just gives me a really broad range of what I can do and a lot of instant feedback on what's happening. So that's kind of what I like. If you know how your motivation and mental energy just gets drained as you're working on something deeply technical for a long time. Mm-hmm. I find PHP drains me the least, but part of that might be the familiarity, because I've written in it for 11 years, right? If you're in year one, you're going to be looking at this language and noticing all its weird inconsistencies. But if you're 11, you've already written a function call that wraps around and makes everything like consistent already in your own framework, or you use something else, or you're aware of the weird, inconsistencies from the past, or you have an IDE that helps you get around that. So you're going to have that with JavaScript too, or any other language where like when you get into it, it's like,
there's that learning curve, so to speak.
The learning curve is and
So what would you say are some benefits? Let's just talk about some of the benefits of being a PHP developer. I mean, I think you kind of hit on them just now. Mm-hmm. You like, well, and I guess philosophy is kind of your own take on something. But what do you think the benefits are? Like, could you just hit them up?
Well, and having said that, I mean, why should a company use PHP over JavaScript?
Yeah.
I mean,
just throw down on that
this is like a very controversial topic, and people will tell you the opposite thing all the time. They'll tell you JavaScript's better. No, PHP is better. In reality, there isn't a huge difference between the two. And
as far as what you can do.
As far as what you can do, yeah. It might be that PHP does a little bit more.
Really?
But yeah, where say with the Apache web server that runs a lot of the internet, it's a native plugin to PHP. So you just go enable PHP, and if you have PHP installed, it's already connected. Now with like using JavaScript, you're going to be using Node, which is another layer between your JavaScript and your code, and then you have to have that talk to the world, and the setup can be a little bit more complicated. There might be a little bit more moving.
Do a lot of the same things, but in a way different way.
Yeah.
In a way different way. With PHP, every time you send a request to the web server, it's starting up a PHP script and dumping out the contents. With Node, generally, you are designing almost like a running service, and then you're talking to that service. So it's it can depend on your application. I like the small scripts that do one thing and then move on technique, because if something breaks along the chain of what your program is doing, it can stop. Like say you have a fault in your program, it doesn't take the whole thing down. So like the small series of PHP scripts that do little things is the way that PHP was meant to be designed. Whereas with Node, it's not exactly like that. I'm not super familiar with how it's set up, by the way, so I could be a little bit ignorant.
So would you say there's a difference? I mean, not a difference. A reason that a company would go with PHP over Java? Or, I mean, is there any, there's not really a reason other than maybe they just have legacy stuff?
Yeah.
I mean, why change your whole house when your house is functioning?
I know that is the thing. You can accomplish the same thing with both tools, and there are tons of people that love JavaScript and build the same stuff that I do. So it seems almost like it's a more stylistic choice. I can't say that there's like say a huge performance difference between the two languages, so that's not really the thing.
Interesting.
I mean, there's a lot of back and forth on this, right? Like PHP might be a little bit faster than JavaScript right now, but then that can shift in a couple months with one update, right? So they're really neck and neck, and there isn't particularly a great reason business-wise to choose it. I know that there are definitely more long-term skilled PHP developers than there are JavaScript developers. So from a hiring perspective, there's more of them, which means they generally are cheaper, just market dynamics, right? And with more experience, whereas with JavaScript, the mainstream usage of it didn't start until maybe 10 years ago or so. Right. So there's still there's probably still things to iron out with it and more libraries to build. But PHP has, libraries for days because it's what everyone used forever.
Got it.
It's old trusty technology versus the new stuff.
So are there any cons, would you say? I mean, what are the cons of PHP? Come on. I mean, you've only said good things. There's got to be something bad about it.
Well, this is the downside. This is the downside of it being around so long, okay, and not being designed to be as big as it is now. So when you go on Stack Overflow looking for an answer to one of your programming questions, you're probably going to get an outdated answer unless you specifically are really looking for a new one. Even in the PHP documentation, there's stuff that's outdated. It's just been around so long. You can get some old, very bad advice that will create a security hole in your program, or whatever. So it's sifting through the litter box for the solution of what you need in PHP is longer process, because it's just been around longer. It's changed more. The right way to do it has changed multiple times.
Interesting. That makes total sense.
Yeah, the correct practice is still shifting. And so you might get an answer from an old practice and then, put some legacy garbage in your app. You don't want to do that. So you have to kind of know what you're navigating when you look for PHP advice. But again, you have guys that have been doing it, and gals that, forever. So,
right.
It'll all sort out. That's the only real disadvantage I could think of using it.
That's cool, though. I mean, that's cool because, I mean, it's a negative, but it's also reassuring because it's been around so long.
Yeah, I mean, you have that knowledge and understanding. You know that it's going to be there for a while.
Yeah, exactly. With that said, we wanted to talk a little bit. Didn't we want to talk a little bit about your take on developers and hiring them and how would you do that? How do you feel about it? Didn't we want to touch on that subject?
Yeah, I mean, having said that, from a company perspective too, like, the one question that I had is, how does a company understand and how does a company know how to gauge their ROI from a software project? I mean, is it something you can get more value from going with PHP over maybe, say, JavaScript, or vice versa?
That's a really hard question to answer because I've never done any huge JavaScript projects. I've only done really big PHP ones.
Fair enough.
Generally speaking, I don't know about the amount of time a programmer needs to spend. I think because PHP is better known because it's been around for longer, it might have an edge here in terms of like the cost, and the cost of the developer tends to be lower. So it might be that you get the ROI out of the PHP project. The best ROI. The best way to make sure that you get your money's worth when you're doing web development, though, is the communication aspect. That's where your communication
to the developer with the project, and there's no weird scope creep and crazy. Everybody actually understands what the project is and how to actually do it. Yeah, the communication, it goes back down to that, an actual real process.
Exactly. This is where no matter what language you're writing it in, you could just produce a complete dud if you don't do it right. I see, in my business, I deal with a lot of small to mid-sized businesses that are generally not really good at hiring and managing developers, and I see that I get tasked with working on some code that they've had random people just sort of patch together, and the whole system isn't just a cohesive whole. It's a Rube Goldberg
big
machine
mess
with duct tape on it.
Right. Just for that specific patch and not worrying about anything
just
else.
For that only patch, and then some other guy's writing something under another programming philosophy, and the whole thing is just like, eventually if you keep doing that, you're going to end up with the Leaning Tower of Pisa. It's just going to fall apart on its own, and you're holding it together. That's what I jumped into, where a lot of companies that I've started with, they thought they can just hire a programmer to
fix it.
Do that, yeah.
Write this little thing and then add this little thing.
Yeah, we just need this little fixes. Hey, it should be really simple. We just need this one little bitty thing, and they don't realize that little bitty thing is an iceberg and all this other crap that's underneath it, right?
Yeah, and really,
but they don't understand that. All they know is, hey, it's just this little thing we need fixed.
Yeah, it needs what starts out as I need a couple scripts to do things turns into a learning management system half as complex as Canvas.
Exactly.
Which is
and they're like, what are you talking about? Why are you charging so much? You're like, dude.
Yeah,
you've asked for the moon and you want a grain of sand.
Yeah, the architecture needs to be thought of when you're doing this, and if you're going to hire a bunch of random people, that doesn't happen. And then also there's a communication problem between the company and the programmer of how should it work? What's the ideal workflow for the user who's going to use this thing? That doesn't really get communicated very well, and that's how we get a lot of software where you fire it up and you're like, who designed this? Well, it's like a programmer designed this because he didn't know how it should work. He didn't use it himself. He was tasked with building it. And I, in my company, I really strongly believe in dog fooding, where it's like, if I can get the company to teach me how to do the work tasks that the other person would be using this for, and force me to
use it,
to use their workflow, I will eventually come up with the best workflow without asking
100%.
And the asking, it's like, that's the hard part too, right? Because as a programmer, you're going to ask a question like, well, should it shift to this other screen over here? And the user has no idea.
I think that's a gold nugget. You've just said a gold nugget for developers, because I think a lot of them aren't open to learning that way. Do you think that has really assisted you to say, hey, I want to actually learn about the product that I'm actually trying to fix before I go in there and play with it? Do you think that that's for the developers listening or anybody out there? Hey, think about from the user's point of view. I know a lot of us developers and IT folks don't like to think about the user, but don't you think that helps?
It does. I think because we get tunnel vision in our industry, we're thinking about the technical aspects, and that is actually a real big problem with us, and why people don't like tech people, because, well, we just have sort of a narrow field. So if you can expand out of that a little bit and start thinking about how the users are going to
talked about that so many times.
Yeah, then you could become an exceptional developer, because you don't have so much
and
time
desired, a very desirable developer.
Yeah, absolutely. If like, say, you can get to know a client's needs well enough, which is, that's the long-term relationship, right?
Absolutely.
Which is why you don't want a bunch of random coders patching things on. You never get that relationship. You never transmit that knowledge of how the thing should work.
Right.
But if you have the relationship and you have the programmer understanding what the company is doing, they can use their intuition to come up with a pretty good design, and then the communication between them and the business is very minimal. It's more like, I came up with this complete design, but do you want this to happen instead of that? What is your preference? And that would be an alternative to sitting in meetings every week, which is what a programmer doesn't want to do, because he's busy thinking about logical things and doesn't want to deal with human beings.
Right. Exactly. I mean, I don't know if this is a taboo question, but do you think they don't decide to understand the functionality because it's more job security, that they're just building what they're asked to?
Man, I guess it just depends on how the programmer sees their job. Maybe
fair enough.
I have actually known a couple people who admitted to job security moves, and I just went, man, that's screwed up.
Right.
And
I've seen it backfire so many times.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So many times. It's like, dude, if you'd have just been awesome, because if you're awesome, you have job security.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You don't have to build it in.
Yeah. These are the works of not someone you want around.
Exactly.
But as an employer, you can't just sit there and go through the code and find that out. So it's a mystery to you, and you don't find it out until later. So really, the relationship between you and the programmer is really critical.
It's huge.
It's like the relationship between you and the architect that's about to build your Fortune 500 company HQ. Like, that needs to be a really solid relationship.
I think that is the next gold nugget for companies that are listening. You have got to have a relationship with your developers, and understand what's going on in there.
What other advice would you give to companies for helping them with their project needs? Besides understanding and knowing your staff?
I think maybe I covered a lot of it there. I think getting the programmer to dog food it, and basically considering your relationship between your program architect a relationship, instead of let's see how cheaply I can get this done. That's a much better route, because a lot of mistakes are made with let's see how cheap we can get this done. And the other mistake is, let's see if we can adopt brand new technology.
Yeah. Let's throw everything out the door. It'll be great. There's going to be no problems, no hiccups.
Yeah.
We're just going to switch over next week. Is everybody okay with that? Mm-hmm. Sure.
Yeah, well, sometimes the programmer can, because the client is not really, hip to technology, he may want to go and experiment with some new technologies out of his own interest, right? And, maybe it wins, maybe it doesn't. Usually, I don't know.
You wouldn't even give it a 50-50.
We call it an experiment for a reason,
Exactly. I got to ask this. I mean, you kind of touched on it. Have there been times when you have you went to a project and you see this spaghetti bowl of code and everybody that's touched it? Have you ever went to a client and said, you know what, you really need to just redo this. This needs to be redone. Have you done that?
Yeah, and that's and I've had to tell the math company that they had to ditch 2 attempts to rewrite their entire system, and it was like just really hard to tell them that. A lot of programmers will go, well, I didn't write it. It's going to take me a long time to understand it. And their automatic decision is, let's go with my technology X.
That's overall IT.
Yeah, that is.
All IT in the world, we have this weird thing that what I do is the best way to do it. Yeah. So if I go into a new situation, that's all crap.
Right.
And I have to redo it. Even though that's working fine. Because it's just IT, isn't it? I mean, it's just, unfortunately, and I wish this mindset would change. Don't go in and just change everything. Maybe you could learn something and grow from actually paying attention to that.
Oh, absolutely. I'm totally on board with that. I have my preferred technologies and, things, the ways that I want to do it. But I'm not the kind of IT guy that will just go in there and go, I'm changing everything unless I have a justification for it, because they're paying me good money. And it's like, well, I'm just sort of selfishly, if I just say we have to switch everything, I'm being kind of selfish.
Yeah. My philosophy, if we can't do it easier and simpler than it was before, then if we go in if you're going to make it more complicated and more intricate, then again, you're trying to keep your job. At least that's what it feels like to me.
Yeah. And it's like, why not try to keep your job by providing the best service?
Yes. It's not rocket science. If anything, I've learned, the more you actually focus on the client and actually helping the client and giving what the client wants, the more money you'll make, the more clients you'll keep. It's not rocket science, but sometimes IT gets this weird rap, and unfortunately, sometimes rightly so.
Yeah, I mean, when I was real young and doing computer repair at the age of like 13, I couldn't actually get a job doing it because I was too young, even though I had the skills, and eventually, some random person would hire me for a while, but I never could really get a formal job. So I actually worked in customer service for quite a while I, played with computers on the side. And so I learned good customer service while I was learning IT. And I think that's one of the missing keys for a lot of IT guys. I think a lot of guys get in there, and gals, I'm not, all inclusive, right? They get into it because it fits their personality and their interests, right? So natively, the geek is not going to have social skills if they spent most of their time on in front of a computer going through that. True. So they miss that part of the equation. Really, a big part of the value to the client is how you serve them in the customer service aspects. The technical stuff, of course, needs to be solid, but you really need to get that relationship part, especially with when it comes to programming. You want your person to be around for years, because they may be supporting this for years and years and years. It could be something that continues to evolve and doesn't get thrown away because someone said, no, this is in the wrong language, or written in the wrong programming philosophy, because we have religious debates amongst ourselves over things like this.
Right. You know what? I think this is a great place to end this. Is there any last words, anything last, Brad, that you want to say, questions? But I just think this is the perfect place to end. We've
covered a lot.
We have covered a lot. I think we could talk another hour if we wanted to.
We could.
But, we could.
But thank you, David, so much for being on the show. I think we've all gotten some real insight.
Absolutely. I know I have. I mean, it's enlightened me. I mean, at the end of the day, what I've learned is that it's all about making sure that you're there for your client. And That's it.
We go back and forth with that at the end result, if you want to keep your job, if you want to have a good job, if you're looking at good employees, it's the ones that actually care.
Absolutely.
That actually care about taking care of the client or taking care of their company, and that's where customer service happens when you're taking care of your employees. I mean, this all has this.
It all ties in together.
This symbiotic relationship with just being decent.
Right. Well, the funny thing is that's basically the key to my success as someone who's been in business for 2 years but has accidentally been in business multiple times. Because I think of customer service a lot, I get a lot of referrals. I never have to do marketing. It just takes off on its own, really,
word
just
of
through
mouth.
word of mouth. And that's the value of the relationship aspect of it. You have to do a lot of marketing if you're not looking for like directed relationships.
Agreed.
Perfect.
But if you're thinking that way, it's like they think of me as their guy. So it's like I got a guy. I'm that guy.
You're their guy.
I'm not a company. It's a guy.
You're a part of them.
Yeah, it's a whole different way.
You're part of the organization.
You're not the consultant. You're our guy.
Yeah, I get treated like an employee because it's like, because I've sort of made myself like one.
Yeah.
And that's the client that is going to be with me for a while.
Forever.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So true.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. This has been The New IT. We will see you next time for The New IT.